Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I would like to welcome you to our webinar on arts, culture, and climate. This is the final session of our four-part Climate Connections, How to Bring Climate into Your Organization series. So we've had 3 other sessions prior to today, all featuring very different sectors and different speakers. And you can find the recordings for all of those sessions on our website. You'll have to check out the website to see which sectors we were highlighting. And the link to those recordings will be put into the chat for you. So welcome, and we would love to hear from you, in particular, which organization you're joining us from, or what aspect of the arts and culture field you are joining us from, because it is so broad and diverse. So feel free to share that, as well as where you're joining in from and your name. And we'll look forward to seeing that coming in the chat. My name is Emiko Newman. I'm sure some of you know me by now. I'm the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. And I know that we are all joining this call from many different locations from throughout so-called British Columbia and even beyond that. And I myself am calling him from Toronto, or Toronto, which is the ancestral territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Huron-Wendat, and the Seneca. And as part of today's land acknowledgement, I thought I would do something a little bit different. I wanted to share something that is very relevant that's happening as we speak, in case some of you are not aware of this. Currently in northern BC, there is a pipeline fight that is ramping up very quickly. And I'm not referring to the Coastal GasLink pipeline in this case. I'm referring to the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Line, or PRGT pipeline. So this is a project that I think people are just starting to hear about. Construction was planned to get underway just this past weekend, so very recent. But then we saw a few days ago that the Gittineau hereditary chiefs, because it is being planned partially on Gittineau territory up in northern BC, the Gittineau hereditary chiefs have established a blockade to prevent construction traffic from getting through. So they are still there as we speak, and they are determined to remain in place for the coming months. So if you are not following what's happening, I would really encourage you to do a little research and find more information. Mari is our tech person today. She's going to be dropping some links into the chat. So there's a video that Dogwood BC put out, which is incredibly informative. I would encourage you to watch that. There is a donation link. The chiefs are accepting financial donations if you are able to support that way. And there's also a letter writing tool, because we need the BC government to hear from British Columbians that we are not in support of this project. So I wanted to share this with you all in case you were not aware, and because we cannot be talking about climate solutions without talking about the work that Indigenous communities are doing on the ground every single day to defend and protect their land and waters. And it is our duty to support them in any way that we can, and to make sure that we are staying informed about these sorts of violent colonial projects that are being proposed. So I hope you will take some time after the session to take a look at some of those resources, and thank you. This session today is being hosted by the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, which is a joint coalition that brings together diverse sectors from all across the province to push the BC government to take more ambitious climate action. We were established 3 years ago when we sent an open letter to the BC government where we outlined 10 urgent climate actions that we wished them to take. To date, we have approximately 585 groups who have now signed on in support of this open letter from across so many different sectors, including arts, business, faith, health, tourism, The list goes on and on. And the biggest thing that all of you who are here today can do to support the BC Climate Emergency Campaign is to sign on behalf of your organization if you have not already. So if you are not a signatory, I would really ask you to please become one. If you do, then you'll start to receive our newsletter. You'll hear all about future events and actions and that sort of thing. So please consider doing so, and the link to that will also be going into the chat. So I also want to just acknowledge that everybody is at their own point in their climate journey. Some of us are probably joining here today who you would not consider yourself an activist. You have not really been involved in climate advocacy, or maybe some of you have been doing this work for a very long time, and you know a lot about the issue. So wherever you are at, we hope that today's session will be helpful for you, and that it will provide you with some food for thought about how the climate crisis is currently and will continue to impact you and your organization and the wider sector that you're a part of. And of course, arts and culture, it's huge. There are so many different sorts of organizations that fall under that very wide umbrella. So we have two speakers joining us today, one of whom is in the museum side of things and one is in the film side of things. And so they represent just two perspectives with underneath that larger umbrella. And so I just wanted to recognize that. And I'm sure that they will do a wonderful job of speaking about their own experiences that I'm sure will be relevant to many of you. And without further ado, I will now be introducing these speakers. First, I will introduce Viviane Gosselin, who is a settler working on unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. She is the Director of Collections and Exhibitions and Curator of Contemporary Culture at the Museum of Vancouver. Her current research applies regenerative design principles to curatorial work. That sounds so cool. Would love to hear more. She is the project lead for SAGE, or the Sustainable Arts and Green Ecosystem, which is a cross-sectoral initiative whose goal is to incorporate circular models of production and consumption into the creation of exhibitions and theater plays. Also super fascinating. And finally, she's a member of the advisory group for the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice. So welcome, Viviane. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much.
And our second speaker is Tracey Friesen, who is Managing VP of the Canadian Media Producers Association, BC, where she supports 160 BC-based independent film and television production companies and provides input on sustainability and climate action. Tracey has over 30 years of experience in Canada's cultural sector. She spent more than a decade at the National Film Board, where she earned producer and executive credits on dozens and dozens of social and environmental documentaries. And she's also written some major research papers for DOC, and was Director of Communications at the David Suzuki Foundation for a while. And finally, she also founded Story Money Impact, which is a charitable organization advancing education around media. So welcome, Tracey. We are actually, before I get into our questions, I just want to mention to folks that as you're listening today, if any questions pop up for you, you can put them in the chat and we will have a Q&A at the very end, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Mari is our tech person today. You can see in her name, it says tech. So if you are having any issues, you can feel free to just send her a little private message and she can help you out. All right, so now we can finally get into the questions for our speakers, which I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. And what I want to start off with is having you both paint the picture about the sort of work that you do and how that relates to climate. And you can take that in any direction you would like. let's get started with Viviane, and then we'll move to Tracey.
Okay, cool. So you can hear me well? Good. Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here with Tracey and the coalition, and thanks for everyone who's joined in. I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And yeah, there's part of me that feels like there's a lot of weight on my shoulders because, I don't want to speak necessarily on behalf of a sector, but at the same time, I do work with the Coalition of Museum for Climate Justice. So I've had the privilege of seeing how museums are grappling with the challenge of addressing the climate emergency in our sector. But from the get-go, I just, painting the picture in our kind of world is that museums are like super diverse organizations and cultural institutions, right? So they come in all sizes and shapes. And so we have different governance, focus, different types of collections connected to different fields of inquiry. So, we have science museums, natural history, art galleries, and, museums with living collections, aquariums, and botanical gardens. So we have one thing in common, I would say, like generally speaking, is the care for collections. So we need some kind of storage space. We display knowledge in space, and we have a public education mandate. So, and we are one of few cultural spaces with a mandate to support lifelong learning about a variety of topics, right? So we're kind of like neatly positioned to address a bunch of very topical issues. Now, the big question for all of us in the museum field is how do we talk about climate change with our public and publics? How do we advance public conversations on climate awareness and literacy? How do we invite and inspire climate action and make our communities more resilient? And in doing this in tandem with efforts to decolonize and indigenize all aspects of our work. So like I said, we're well equipped because we're gathering spaces. I'm really trying to make a pitch here for all of you to, like, if you haven't already worked with museum, to think about doing so. We have staff trained in public engagement. But what's interesting in the museum field, we really have like the front of the house. So anything that's public facing, exhibition, public programs, online engagements, but we also have the back of the house, like that produce an enormous amount of waste and we consume a lot of energy. So we have like these climate controlled environments, gallery spaces and collection storage, because we want objects to last between 200 and 300 years in our collection. So there's that. Our exhibitions, they're temporary. People or members of the public want newness. So we change our exhibitions. We tend to build them and dismantle them. And there's been a tradition of waste being wasteful. So, but and one weird thing about our field is that climate control is controlling having these very tight parameters of relative humidity and temperature for the collection environment. And we realized, for example, that just by relaxing those parameters, we gain incredible amount of energy efficiency. So this was kind of slaying. Is it slaying the dragon or slaying the cow, like a sacred cow? Well, because this was not something that was even imaginable, say 10 years ago. And we have started doing, and it's been a life changer or a game changer in the case of museums. So I will continue talking about our activities, but I'll leave Tracey talk.
Thank you, Viviane and Emiko. Very big fan of yours and the BC Climate Emergency Campaign and the Climate Emergency Unit. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm going to actually start with an image because I can, and that might get people's heads there faster. So I'm in the film and television sector, the Canadian Media Producers Association. And one of the questions that comes up all the time is, what do I do? What can I do? How do I start? And so with a very strong hat tip to our friends at the Sustainable Production Forum who built these 2 slides, I think it's just a good reminder that there's all sorts of ways in, right? So there's, here you can see the actual inputs, you can see about team building, communications, and I really appreciated that they did this kind of like build your own game here. You don't have to do it all, but there are places to start, and sometimes just taking the first steps can be really helpful in getting the momentum going in teams, in the film and television sector, but certainly anywhere. So just starting with that. For us, we're a member-based organization, and our members are production companies. I head up a BC branch, but we're a national organization. And so in BC, we have about 160 members. But the climate work that we're doing on a national level in collaboration with a great many organizations who are doing excellent work as well. Our work falls into like 4 main buckets: research, training, convening and sponsoring, and what I might call influencing or climate storytelling. So there's a lot of it, maybe 80% of it right now is about sustainable production practices, but we also fully recognize the power of film and television storytelling creators, media, to influence public and hopefully change hearts and minds. So with the research, we've commissioned original research around a number of different topics, such as the budgetary implications of sustainable production practices. Does it actually cost more? Do some things cost less? Does it even out in the wash? And where's the biggest bang for your buck in terms of effort, money, and energy to reduce the most emissions when in a production process? That was done by consultancy Earth Angel. There's another very active consultancy in Canada called Green Spark Group. They've done some of our research as well. We've done individual case studies of projects to really look at where their emissions are landing, including in the animation space as well, different kind of a model of film and television. And we're in the process now of trying to name the footprint. Like, what is the footprint of the Canadian film and television sector? So with that, we're bringing together the key federal organizations like the CBC, Radio Canada, real leader in mandating carbon calculators for productions and have for a couple of years now, and Telefilm Canada and the Canada Media Fund. And they likewise are active in sustainability and making requests of producers around taking certain actions, and working toward calculators. We're trying to bring those calculators together, do some data extrapolation, and try to figure out where do we stand, what's the baseline for the sector, so we can set targets, dates, and a path toward reaching them as a whole industry. So that's the research part. From a training perspective, BC should be really proud. Real Green BC was founded almost 20 years ago. It sits under the Creative BC umbrella at the moment, and it's really been super activated in the last 10 years, and then even more specifically, I would say the last 5 years. They run free training for sustainable production practices and carbon calculators for film projects, and have a whole wealth of resources. So BC really has been a provincial leader on this. Yeah, we're happy to see them partnering now with the Indigenous Screen Office and other organizations to really bring these practices into more production environments. CBC2, Seeds of Change, they do a series of webinars and have done trainings. And then we ourselves did a pilot kind of bespoke training program for a select number of members to bring a consultant into their business and meet them where they're at, to Emiko's opening comments. Not only individuals, but companies are at different places on their journey here. And so it was a way to try to up their game on sustainable production practices. Then in the convening sponsoring bucket, the Sustainable Production Forum will be in its 8th year this year. Lands in Vancouver on October the 8th. So I know there'll be links sent out after, but that's something to check out for those of you who might be in the film and television space or curious about it. A day-long event all about sustainable production practices and storytelling. In a convening sense, I'm going to mention SCALE, which is where Viviane and I first met. It's a national organization, sectoral climate arts leadership for the emergency. And it brings together different parts of the arts and culture sector together to see how folks can learn from each other and maybe collaborate around content and practices. And also here in BC, Producing for the Planet was founded. And it's a collection of production companies that are vowing to take certain steps under certain buckets. It's less than a year old, and nationally already 80 production companies have signed up. So lots of promise there. They've created a really robust guide, and will keep growing, and we'll have a chance as the years pass to see how these pledges are met and how they might add to them. And then lastly, climate storytelling. This is kind of where my heart is, because I spent those years at the National Film Board and with Story Money Impact. So just to highlight Story Money Impact, which is run by Sue Bealey, amplifying the reach of social and environmental justice films. So really recognizing that films do have the power to affect social change if they can be shown in the right settings, and that there's something that somebody can do after they see it, like quite immediately after they see it. So it's about impact and using media as a tool to affect change. And lastly, one other hopeful thing is that there's an annual funding entity for the documentary community that falls under Creative BC and is supported by Rogers. And this is the first year that they've made this pre-development program. All of the applicants had to have a sustainability theme in their proposal. So that's super new. It's probably not going to happen every year, but I'm really watching that cohort and interested to see what kind of projects might come out of that.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. Sounds like there are so many amazing initiatives and resources already underway within film and media. So Tracey did already share with us some of these groups to be putting out to all of you after the session. So I'll be sending those by email if folks want to learn more. So thank you both for opening up with these experiences. And for our next question, I want to, it's a bit more of a personal question. Can you share what it was that inspired you to bring climate into your work? And I will start with Viviane again on this one.
Well, first of all, I want to say how impressed I am with how organized the film industry is in comparison to museums. So we are, I'd say, a decade behind, but we're learning. So I'd say working closely, what inspired me the most, like working very closely with Indigenous communities on several projects. As you know, like many museums have in their holdings Indigenous belongings. So I'm involved in programming and in the return of cultural belongings into their source communities. And in that way, been exposed to Indigenous ways of knowing, which are essentially forms of ecological knowledge and sciences based on the interconnections between all forms of living life. So it's very holistic ways of seeing the world based on the principle that we need to give more than we take in order to replenish natural resources. But a turning point, like a very kind of turning point, I'd say for me, happened when at one point we closed an exhibition that we had done on historical ecology. So the exhibition was centered on the importance of rewilding the city, and it was trying to make the case that for increasing the biodiversity in the city, we needed to reintroduce flora, fauna that used to thrive in the city before intense urbanization. And the big idea was, in order to know what was local, flora and fauna, well, we needed to study nature's past, which we were proposing we do through the lens of historical ecology. And that was like 10 years ago, and it was like an emerging discipline. And the exhibition was phenomenal. Like, it presented the principle behind rewilding by presenting these concepts of historical ecology. And it was clever. It was beautifully researched design. We had a theater designer who created these 12 funky like vignettes and diorama representing these concepts and staging them. And I remember the day after we disassembled the exhibition, I went into the loading bay and found the exhibition furnitures, like all the risers, the walls, the props in the waste bins, ready to be taken to the landfill. And it was kind of that moment of cognitive dissonance, if you want, where I could see and feel the disconnect between our, the storyline, the public messaging, and the wastefulness of our behind the scene activities. And so that prompted my team to start rethinking design and fabrication methods. We were kind of good at upcycling some materials because, I mean, we're mid-sized museum, so we're kind of frugal, but it wasn't systematic. So we consolidated our practice as an organization and became much better, to a point where we were like half our material was constantly reused. But at one point you feel like you reach a ceiling. So we applied to a grant with Canada Council for the Arts, which we received in 2023. It's a 2-year grant to create SAGE, so Sustainable Arts for Green Ecosystem. And it's a cross-sectoral network of organizations. So working with local design schools, so like the next generation of makers, if you want, museums, art galleries, theater venues, and exhibition designers, and fabrication shop, like the Scene Shop, for example, that works both in films, not film, well, rarely in films, but theater and museums and art galleries. And really looking at how we build these exhibition-like structures. And so we have formed this community of practice. We meet 4 times a year, and subgroups meet more often. We learn, like we have speakers, we exchange material, we loan material to each other. And we were able to hire a sustainability expert that's kind of coaching us through. I call her our sustainability doula. And so she's really helping us being more systematic and guide us through the process of creating more circular projects. And so we are working on an online kit together, and that's going to be launched this fall. So yeah, so that was, with the rewilding project, all this kind of was triggered by that, and just starting to getting bigger, really.
Thanks for sharing that story. That's a really powerful image of you just, walking into the loading bay and seeing this beautiful exhibit in the trash. And, it goes exactly against the principles that you were trying to share with the public. So that's why we're having you speak with us today, because not only did you witness that, you did something about it, right? And now you're part of all these initiatives that are working to reduce waste. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And Tracey, let's hear from you. What inspired you to bring climate into your work?
Yeah, I do have a personal anecdote, but it predates all of this. I'm thinking back to the late 80s, early 90s, and the Stein Valley music festivals. So going to these festivals on Lilwat territory, drawn by the music, being with friends and camping, looking up at the mountains that were being talked about, that everybody was fighting for, caused myself and my group of friends to want to explore those mountains. And so it became an annual tradition to go to the Stein Music Festival that was in support of this wilderness area, and then go and explore the wilderness, which really, contributed to a hiking bug that I still have. And I think that that's an actual, very clear demonstration of art influencing change. of the being drawn by the art, pulled in by artists and passion and sharing and music, and then having that spark, like an interest in the actual fight that was going on to protect that wilderness area. So yeah, I just think so fondly of like lying in those mountains thinking, yeah, this needs to stay like this. And it has been protected. So it's a happy ending story too. Not all, but that one is.
Yeah, good. That sounds like a beautiful experience, Tracey. I'm curious. We've been kind of talking about some positive. We've been sticking to the more positive side of things for the most part, but I'm curious whether either of you have been encountering any challenges as you're trying to make these connections and bring climate into your work. You know, for example, pushback from colleagues who are like, why is this important? Or financial limitations and funding, that sort of thing. Or I know you're both from you both are involved in very different types of work. So I'm sure you'll have different stories, but let's start with Tracey for this one.
Yeah, thanks. For producers, it's a tough time. Hey, like there's inflation has made budgets really tight. Margins are really small. The cost of borrowing money is really high. The COVID difficulties kind of were very expensive. There were American strikes. Like it's so often what arises is what more can be asked of us? Like we're trying to stretch our dollars as best we can. And so I think in a way that research around is there a green premium for producing sustainably was really fundamental. And the outcome of that when we hear this is that we can share that if you start early enough, like if you start at the budgeting process, not 3 days before you're starting to shoot or even before you're starting to prep, there's a lot that can be done where there are savings. And so to learn about how productions can be run in ways that are better for the environment and ultimately possibly not only have a premium, but could actually have a price reduction. And I think that as everything in our society, hopefully, infrastructure and regulations and whatnot promote a more a more sustainable world that we all live in that will positively impact all sectors, it will become increasingly that much more affordable to do these processes. So I think that's something that we run up against is I'm too busy. There's too much going on. It's too hard, and I just can't add in something else. And then I might just mention on a personal level, with some vulnerability, staying positive has been getting harder. Right. So we are all pecking away at things and we make plans for something that might unfold 2 years from now. And meanwhile, we're in the decisive decade. This is an emergency. And so starting to have darker feelings about that and trying to increase the urgency wherever possible, so that we have a chance.
I'm sure many people, if not everyone on this call, can relate to some of those feelings, Tracey, myself included. Viviane, over to you.
I'd say perhaps the biggest pushback is definitely not in the relaxed guidelines for environmental control, because it's a win-win. The bill at the end of the month, the electricity bill has shrunk, right? So here's like a true positive, net positive for everyone. But the pushback for us is more in exhibition building, using principles of modularity, disassembly. The art designers that will be like, it won't look as great, it's going to be boring. People will feel like they're always seeing the same thing. And so what we're saying is actually we say, well, we'll work with the very good designers who can take on the challenge of embracing circularity and as an opportunity to come up with amazing, engaging, innovative exhibition. But so we have to essentially put that in the contract, like those parameters that you have to for designers. Otherwise, the easy road is to make sure that we order at the a Home Depot, for example, like the material, as opposed to like kind of constantly reusing the material we have, or knocking at the doors of some of our colleagues in different museums or film industry, for example, to see if they have any material available.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Viviane, for sharing that. And I'm going to push right ahead. What would you say to folks who are here today who are involved in some sort of arts and culture organization, whatever that may be, and they care deeply about climate work, but they're not exactly sure what steps they can take to bring it more, to integrate it more deeply into their organizations? Tracey, I know you already shared that image with us of the puzzle pieces. That was great. Do you have any more advice for folks? You're on mute, Tracey.
I think the combination of learning who else is doing what and finding others. I think a lot of it is about talking about it, you know, and this is not just within our sectors, but I think this is with us as citizens, you know, to make sure that we have a community and we can find each other and we can ask each other for support and we can learn from each other. And so one of the pieces is to just be kind of comfortable enough to name it and to be talking about it, because then there are referrals to, well, have you met Viviane? She's got this thing going on, right? And have you, you know, and that's how these kinds of, you know, coalitions and collectives can grow smarter together, you know, as a group. So I mean, there are the practical things, you know, and one of the things that we're looking at right now is it's not the water bottles, you know, it is kind of the water bottles, and the water bottles are a way in, and sometimes that's the way that somebody can start, and then it's like the gateway, you know, and then they can think about doing more impactful pieces. But partly why we're conducting research is to say, like, what is it? And in the film and television sector, it's really clear. It's fuel and it's energy, right? And materials, yes, materials are a large component, but how do we measure the biggest amount of emissions and spend most of our energy there rather than getting lost in some of the smaller details? It's big and it's systemic. So it's about learning that. So, and that comes back to where I started. It's about communications in my mind.
Yeah, just quickly to emphasize that point, Tracey, because this is something that has come up in every one of our sessions that we've held, is the importance of not reinventing the wheel, but looking for people who are already doing this work. It doesn't matter what sector you work in, what sort of organization you work in. I can guarantee that there are other people within that field who are already involved in something. And so it's easy to feel like you're isolated, or like you're the only one who cares about this, or you feel, okay, no one's doing anything, so I have to start my own nonprofit or whatever it is. But there are so many ways to already get involved with something that exists. So thank you for mentioning that point. And Viviane, over to you.
Yeah, well, similarly to Stacey, the connecting with local and regional community groups already doing climate works, or whether they're on your field or not. Like the cross-sectoral, I think, is extremely regenerative. So we learned so much from other practices and how we can adapt them. Just a small thing, but that's not even like climate related, but I've always admired how the film industry, at the end, you have the credits and you have everyone who's acknowledged. And I thought, how like respectful is that, you know, because in museum field, it's only the curators. And now, like, thanks to your industry, like the film industry, is like, we have everyone thanked in our credit panels, in our catalog, like from visitor services to programming to engagement to admin staff, right? And I think, so it's learning from each other's best practice. For those who are considering working with museums, I would say the secret is start with small, you know, a joint public program, get to know each other. And the idea is to grow old together, right? Long term. And And from like a one-day event to a multi-day to a large exhibition that is exploring these sensitive issues, and just like in the film industry, is really pushing for compelling storytelling, because people are moved by the arts, and are moved to actions that way. And yeah, so, and also come early. Museums are not the fastest beast in the world. It takes us 3-4 years, to produce a large exhibition. So we need to plan ahead. When people are coming and want to do an exhibition in 6 months from now, it's, we have to explain to them the process. So, but when people, I just had an organization that came just a few months ago, and it was for 2027. So, gives us time to get to know each other and plan well.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for sharing. And I want to conclude this part of the session, and move us into our Q&A and focus on some questions that the audience has raised. But first of all, thank you both. Can I have everybody join in the chat, perhaps, to say a big thank you to our two speakers for sharing their stories and experiences and advice. It's nice to hear such diverse, perspectives. So thank you very much. And I'm gonna pass it on to our first question, which has come from an attendee. And this is a very intriguing question, so I'm curious to hear what the answers are going to be here. So the question is, would a climate responsive culture require a systemic understanding and modeling of interdependence and reciprocity? And if the answer is yes, then how so? And that's a bit of a long question, so I'll copy the text into the chat here.
I just want to say, sorry, Tracey, I call you Stacy.
It's okay. My grandmother did that for years.
Okay, thank you. I'm forgiven thanks to your grandmother who preceded me. Okay. Excellent question. And yeah, it's about system thinking and systemic changes. We have to rethink the way we connect with each other, with ourselves, with the more than human world. And I think our regenerative methodologies and ways of doing the work is what will take us in a different place. That is constantly rethinking in terms of I guess I'm inspired by theories of care work, right? Where you're always looking at replenishing your energy, the energy of others as you're moving forward, or like permaculture with the 3 big principles, which is like care for the planet, care for others, and or care for the planet, care for people, and fair share. And everything, if you always work with these principles, everything will be fine. It's at the minute that, and when you look at how most of us, almost pretty much all of us, with the exception of Indigenous communities, are living with a nature deficit disorder. We're so disconnected from nature, which is pretty much at the root of all the problems we have, and that that's justified the destruction of the planet, right? So if you don't feel connected, then you can justify selling the planet. And yeah, so absolutely those and I'm very inspired by principles of permaculture and ways of adapting that into our work lives. It's not just about agriculture and growing food. It's a way of living our daily life in whatever sector we are.
Thanks, Viviane. Are you okay, Tracey, if we move on to the next question?
I have a little piece I would like to say on this one. Is that okay?
Sure, go for it.
When I see words like interdependence and modeling, reciprocity, etc., I want to name Abundance Community Farm, which is a farm that I have a deep relationship with. And a filmmaker, Saper Samimi, made a half-an-hour documentary about it. And when I think about both that film and that project, it really is trying to show through culture, art, media, in this case, film, that there are models that are rocky and have warts and whatnot, but are where communities are coming together and trying principles of community building and art making and permaculture, gardening and sharing and interdependence. And so I get excited about media offerings, storytelling that shows maybe on the other side, there's goodness there. There's other
Mhm.
ways of thinking and living in harmony. And so we need, it can't be all doomsday projects, and a lot of the film work is, to be fair. So, hats off to those filmmakers who are trying to envision a better future, or shine their spotlight on people who are trying to envision a
Mhm.
better future.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And thank you, Eric, for sharing the link to that in the chat, Abundance Community Farm. That sounds really inspiring. So I'll have to check that out after. Um, and so I guess continuing along this thread of positivity, I know you both have mentioned some successes in weaving together climate and arts and culture, but are there any other examples that you can share with folks? Could be from your own organizations or just other work that you've heard of. Other examples of really successful local initiatives that are weaving climate and art.
I could go with, and I think I saw New World Theater represented, but Eyes of the Beast is a theater play that is just about to come out in Victoria. And it is in collaboration with the Climate Disaster Project, which is really cool because it's a conference of like School of Journalism's at UVic, but also in different parts of the world where students in journalism and journalists have interviewed survivors of climate disaster and those have been turned into testimonials, and New World Theater has had access to those transcripts and written a play based and highly inspired by these experiences. And what you see in those stories is well, in some ways, it's asking us to bear witness, and I just want to say, these people, on top of that, the interviewers were trauma informed, like trained, and so really knew how to handle these difficult stories. But what's wonderful is that we also get to witness amazing show of solidarity, mutual aid. And I think that's and new ways of working in solidarity, and hoping not just like to survive but thrive that way. But those are often model and inspiration. And the Climate Disaster Project has approached the museum for another iteration of a project. So I think it's wonderful when it starts with you have theater people, but also museums and art galleries that will be involved in the process. But I mean, I'm really looking forward to going to Vancouver and attending that play. Yeah.
And I would say in the last year or so, there's been a bumper crop of Indigenous-led documentary films about BC land defenders. And so this is a coming together as well of storytellers and activism. And I wrote down the few that just came off the top of my head. So Yinta, set in the Wet'suwet'en territory. I'll come back to Tea Creek. Keepers of the Land, which is in the Great Bear Rainforest, and yay, Rematriation, which has shines a spotlight on Fairy Creek, one of 3 films, one about to come out and 2 already out that are amazing about Fairy Creek. But Tea Creek is set in Kitwanga, so also near kind of Terrace. And it's about an Indigenous farm project that is reteaching agriculture practices to groups of students from smaller communities, that they then bring those skills back to their communities. And it's an amazing place. these are all good, all good projects that I think are success stories right here in BC, sharing the important work of land defenders throughout our province.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing those, Tracey. Of the ones you mentioned, Yinta is the one that I have seen, and I cannot recommend it enough. And they're currently having showings in various places around the country. So go to their website and see if there is a showing near you. Our next question, thank you to the person who submitted this. So maybe it's I don't know how specifically you both can answer this, but I'm curious. It's a question about funding. Are you able to share a little bit about where the funding has been coming for these initiatives that you've been speaking about?
Oh, right. I saw that up in the chat. So a lot of the organizations that I've listed, not the CMPA, but the federal organizations or Real Green or whatnot, are have public support on some level, or industry support, like larger scale industry support that goes into, for instance, something like Real Green would get sponsored by industry. The CMPA, we're a not-for-profit society. We have revenue streams, and so we can invest money in things that are important for our membership, and sustainability is. So some of this research we've invested directly, but we also make partnerships with some of these federal organizations that typically fall under the Heritage Ministry. So again, CBC, Telefilm, and the Canada Media Fund primarily. So those for the things that I listed off, those would be the main sources of funding. Some of them are also not-for-profits or charitable organizations. So Story Money Impact is doing grant writing, is charitable, donors support. Producing for the Planet has been largely volunteer, but it's now also looking for and receiving some public funding.
Yeah, and for us, for public programs and exhibitions, we receive money from their grant base, Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, BC Arts Council, the Vancouver Foundation. There are city grants, smaller grants that we will tap into. Yeah, so a mix of city, provincial, and national agency connected to the arts are funding. Us.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to throw one last question at you. We have just a few minutes, and then I'll get into some closing remarks. Big question, very common question, and we ask this at the end of each of our sessions, and it's basically the question that you hear at every single climate webinar you attend, which is the question of what gives you hope in this work. And I'll let whoever wants to start go first.
Do you want to go, Tracey?
Go ahead, Viviane.
What gives me hope? I'd say it's the confluence of needs and interests in caring for people in the planet at the same time. So for several organizations, it used to be that like social justice and environmental justice were kind of separate streams of like funding and interest groups, and now it seems like to coalesce more and more. For example, I'm working on an exhibition with the very diverse disability community, and looking at disability activism in the city, how it expresses itself, how it manifests, how it has been since 1970, and looking into the future. And when I look at I look at the kind of the values that the disability community has developed and work with. So again, mutual aid, interdependency is what we're talking about, and looking at how applicable it is to development models of caring in more resilient communities. I just think this is the way to go. people coming together, disrupting conventional ideas of like individualism, self-sufficiency, capitalist-driven productivity kind of thing. So I see us like seeing all these groups coming and approaching the museums to see how we can work together. So that gives me hope.
I just want to jump in and say that our very first session in our series was about disability and climate connections, and it was really inspiring. So quick plug in there to go check out that session, everybody.
Yeah, I love the way they imagine the future, and we're doing like speculative futures and graphic novels with them, and I love it. Yeah.
It's been wavering, I'll admit, but I think that what gives me hope is nature itself, and animals and plants and its ability to recover. Nature's quite resilient, you know, if we can clean up our act before we take too much down with us. So the land gives me hope, nature, communities do, the kindness of people to each other when they come together with shared values, and individuals do, you know, people who are devoting their energy, their hearts, their time, to trying to make change and to trying to continue to believe that it's possible.
Thanks, Tracey. And thank you, Viviane. Thank you both so much. This is now the end of our session. And before folks run away, I want to just say a few things. So whether this is the only session you've joined us for, or whether you've been with us through multiple sessions, I want to say a big thank you for taking time to join and learn more about the climate connections that are being made amidst so many different types of work. And as I mentioned at the start, the most helpful thing that you could do if you feel inspired to take some actions would be to get involved with the BC Climate Emergency Campaign by becoming one of our organizational signatories. It's very easy. There's a sign-on form online, and we have a bunch of resources that we want to get out there. We have an election toolkit that we've prepared in advance of the provincial election coming up in October. We have a whole bunch of resources on affordability and climate connections that we're going to be launching soon. So there's a lot going on. You can also just reach out to me via email if you have any questions. And we're also going to be sharing the emails of Tracey and Viviane in case you would like to get in touch with them. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording from today and their contact info and some of the resources or initiatives that they both mentioned. So thank you again for being here. And the most important thing I want to leave everybody with is the importance of having climate conversations with the people in your life. That's really the number one thing that we can do if we want to make a difference, is talk about it, because people care about this stuff, but they often feel nervous to bring it up, or they feel like nobody else cares, but they do. They really do. And so I hope that you'll share some of the learnings from today with your friends, family, and just continue to be making these connections in your work and in everything you do. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Mari, for being a great tech person.
Thanks, Emiko.